Some men think the most dangerous person is the loudest guy in the room. They ignore the silent ones counting escape routes. When my future brother-in-law pointed his carving knife at me to mock me before his wealthy investors, he thought he was humiliating a dull woman. He did not know he had just awakened a ghost, and his arrogance would soon burn his empire to the ground. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us now. Let's begin the story. My name is Allison Ferguson. I am 38 years old, and my life these days is supposed to be quiet. The air at Blackwood Ridge always carried a biting chill. Even in the middle of the afternoon, it was an exclusive, eye-wateringly expensive mountain resort tucked away in the rugged highlands of Idaho. Everything around me screamed manufactured rustic luxury, from the hand-hewn cedar logs of the Grand Lodge to the imported slate of the massive outdoor patio. I sat in a heavy wooden chair in the corner, holding a glass of sparkling water, letting the deep, smoky scent of roasting Wagyu beef wash over me. The barbecue was a carefully orchestrated performance, hosted by Marcus Thorne. Marcus was my cousin Sarah's fiancé, a man whose wealth was only eclipsed by his overwhelming need to be the center of the universe. Today, he had gathered a flock of Silicon Valley tech investors and venture capitalists to pitch them his latest survival training enterprise. I watched him work the grill. He was dressed in high-end tactical gear that had clearly never seen a speck of dirt. His coyote tan cargo pants were crisply ironed, and his combat boots did not have a single scuff on the leather. He moved with an exaggerated swagger, throwing around military buzzwords he had probably learned from action movies. The investors, mostly soft-handed men in fleece vests, laughed at every joke he made, eager to buy into his rugged alpha male persona. I kept my distance. My left shoulder slouched about an inch lower than my right, a permanent, aching souvenir from a shattered collarbone and severed nerves. It was the reason for my early retirement from the Tactical Oversight Bureau, a Black Ops intelligence agency so deeply buried in government shadows that it did not officially exist. For over a decade, my life had been measured in wind speed, bullet drop, and silent extractions. Now, I use those same skills to photograph wildlife. A heavy 600mm camera lens rested on the table in front of me, my new weapon of choice for capturing grizzly bears and eagles instead of hostile targets. Marcus slammed a massive cut of meat onto the wooden cutting board. He grabbed a long, wicked-looking carving knife, flourishing the steel in the sunlight. He loved an audience. As he sliced the beef, his eyes scanned the patio, looking for someone to use as a prop for his ego. His gaze landed on me. I was the odd one out, wearing a simple flannel shirt, sitting quietly while everyone else networked and drank expensive bourbon. "Hey, Allison," Marcus called out. His voice was loud, deliberately projecting over the chatter. The conversations around the patio faded as people turned to look. Marcus pointed the tip of his carving knife directly at my table, gesturing toward the massive camera equipment. A smirk played on his lips. "Look at the size of that lens. What are you hunting with that thing, squirrels?" A few of the investors chuckled politely. Sarah stood near him, looking slightly embarrassed, but she forced a smile, too terrified to interrupt his moment. "I just think it is funny," Marcus continued, pacing a little, playing to his wealthy crowd. "All that heavy hardware, all that camouflage you wear out in the woods. You look like you're deploying to a war zone just to take pictures of birds." He stopped, leaning on the table, and delivered his punchline with a mocking grin. "Tell me, Allison, with all that fancy gear, can you even shoot?" The question hung in the crisp mountain air. I did not flush with anger. I did not frown. Anger is an unpredictable emotion, a fatal liability I had trained out of my system years ago. Instead, I picked up my glass of water. I took a slow, deliberate sip. I let the silence stretch out, making him wait, making him slightly uncomfortable in his own silence. I calculated the distance between us. About 15 feet. I noted his sloppy grip on the knife. I lowered the glass, looked directly into his arrogant eyes, and spoke in a low, perfectly steady tone. Valkyrie. It was not a threat. It was a call sign, a ghost from a previous life. For a second, Marcus just looked confused. But at the far end of the patio, an older man in a tailored tweed jacket suddenly froze. His name was Vance, a retired Navy SEAL who had been brought along by one of the investment firms. Up until this moment, he had been quietly sipping wine. 5 years ago, in a blistering, blood-soaked valley in the Middle East, Vance and his squad had been pinned down by enemy fire. They were dead men walking, until a ghost on a ridgeline nearly a mile away started dropping their attackers one by one. I was that ghost. I provided the sniper cover that let them walk out of that valley alive. Vance stood up so violently that his heavy iron chair scraped backward across the stone floor with a harsh screech. The delicate crystal wine glass slipped from his trembling fingers. It hit the ground, shattering into dozens of pieces, sending a pool of dark red liquid across the expensive slate. Every head snapped toward him. Vance ignored them all. He was staring straight at me, his eyes wide with absolute shock and an overwhelming, deferential awe. He stood at rigid military attention, his chest out, his hands at his sides. "Valkyrie," Vance whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. Then, louder, ignoring the stunned billionaires around him, he bowed his head. "Ma'am, it is an absolute honor. You saved my life." The entire patio turned to ice. The investors looked from Vance, a decorated war hero, to me, the quiet woman in the flannel shirt, the atmosphere completely inverted. The wealthy men who had been laughing with Marcus a moment ago were now staring at me with profound respect and intense curiosity. Marcus stood frozen behind the cutting board. His carving knife suddenly looked like a plastic toy. The macho illusion he had spent all afternoon building had evaporated in an instant. His face flushed a deep, ugly shade of crimson. The humiliation was total, but as I watched his jaw clench, I saw the embarrassment rapidly curdle into a dark, seething resentment. He realized that the woman he had just tried to humiliate was exactly what he was desperately pretending to be. I did not want to ruin Sarah's engagement party. I had no desire to bask in the adoration of strangers. I slowly stood up, slinging my camera bag over my good shoulder. I gave Vance a silent, respectful nod, which he returned with utmost reverence. Without saying another word to Marcus, I turned and walked away from the barbecue, leaving only the smell of hickory smoke and shattered egos behind me. But as I walked down the wooded path toward my cabin, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I knew Marcus Thorne. He was a small, fragile man hiding behind a big bank account. A man like that would never let a humiliation like this slide. The war was not over. It had just begun. The silence of my cabin was absolute, broken only by the crackle of burning pine in the hearth. It was a modest, single-room timber structure sitting on a remote acre of land. For most people, the isolation would be deafening. For me, it was a necessity. I sat on the edge of my simple bed, grinding my teeth as a familiar, jagged spike of sciatic pain shot down my left side. It radiated from the ruined nerves in my shoulder, a physical echo of a mission I was not legally allowed to remember. I pressed a hot towel against my skin, closing my eyes. Sleep rarely came before 3 a.m. When it did, it brought fragmented images, dust storms, the metallic smell of blood inside a transport helicopter, the weight of a rifle stock against my cheek. I had spent over a decade trading pieces of my soul and my body for the safety of a nation that did not know my name. Now, all I wanted was this quiet cabin, my camera, and the peace I had bled to earn. I hid the scars because civilians did not know how to look at them. They either stared with unwanted pity or romanticized a violence they could never comprehend. 72 hours passed before the outside world breached my sanctuary. The crunch of tires on my gravel driveway made me pause. I did not reach for a weapon, keeping them locked away. but my posture shifted instinctively into a defensive stance. Through the window, I saw a heavy black truck cut its engine. Vance stepped out. He wore a heavy wool coat against the mountain wind, his face deeply lined and grim. I opened the door before he could knock. I offered him a cup of black coffee, but he shook his head, refusing to step inside. He had not driven all the way out here to reminisce about the desert. "I am sorry to bring this to your door," Vance said, his voice gravelly. "But there is a lot of garbage spreading across the veteran networks this morning. You need to see it." He handed me a sleek digital tablet. On the screen was a promotional post from Marcus's survival training company. My stomach tightened. It was a photograph of me from the barbecue, taken without my knowledge from a distance. I was sitting at the table, my posture rigid, looking off into the trees, but the image had been heavily filtered, given a gritty, military aesthetic. The caption below it made my blood run cold. It boasted about their new elite tactical tier, claiming the curriculum was designed and overseen by a highly classified intelligence legend. It did not use my real name, but it used the call sign. It implied that the ghost who had saved Navy SEALs was now the chief security advisor for a civilian playground. "He is using you to sell packages worth tens of thousands of dollars to rich executives," Vance stated quietly. "My guys are furious. Stolen valor is one thing, but dragging a verified Black Ops asset into a corporate marketing scam is reckless. If the wrong people connect this profile back to your real identity, your cover is entirely blown." I handed the tablet back to him. The dull ache in my shoulder vanished, replaced by a sharp, icy clarity. "Thank you for bringing this to me. Vance, I will handle it." He nodded once, understanding the finality in my tone, and drove away. I picked up my phone and dialed Sarah. I wanted to give my cousin the benefit of the doubt. I wanted to believe she was unaware of her fiancé's grotesque marketing strategy. She answered on the fourth ring. Her voice was thin, carrying a frantic, breathless quality. "Sarah, I need Marcus to take down the promotional materials featuring my image and my military history," I said, keeping my voice even. "Immediately." There was a long, painful silence on the other end. When she finally spoke, her words tumbled out in a defensive rush. "Allison, please do not do this. It is just marketing. Marcus said it is completely legal because he did not use your full legal name. He just needs a little push for the new fiscal quarter." "Sarah, he is lying to people. He is putting my safety at risk." "You do not understand the pressure he is under," she snapped, though it sounded more like she was trying to convince herself. "His investors want results. I cannot ask him to take it down. He controls the bank accounts for the wedding. Allison, he already told me that if I do not support his business decisions, he will cut off my credit cards. Please, just let him have this. Do not make him angry." The line went dead. I stood alone in the center of my quiet cabin. The phone still gripped in my hand. The melancholy and the desire to hide from the world evaporated. Sarah was not just a supportive partner. She was a hostage. She was being financially controlled, psychologically manipulated, and conditioned to defend a man who was systematically destroying her self-worth. Marcus Thorne was not just a loudmouth civilian playing soldier. He was a parasite. He was a coward hiding behind my bloody history to fill his pockets, while holding my own blood relative hostage with threats of financial ruin. He had assumed my silence was weakness. He had assumed that because I walked away from his childish provocation, I was powerless. A deep, dangerous warmth began to spread through my chest. It was a feeling I had not allowed myself to experience in years. I walked over to the closet and looked at the heavy steel footlocker sitting in the darkest corner. Marcus wanted a war to sell to his investors. I was going to give him one. The very next morning, the digital landscape was saturated with a highly targeted advertising campaign. Marcus had officially launched an advanced tactical training package, marketed exclusively to high-profile chief executive officers and hedge fund managers. The price tag was astronomical, set at exactly $50,000 per head for a 3-day weekend retreat. The promotional videos featured dramatic drone shots of armed men running through the woods. But the voiceover was what made my blood run cold. It boldly promised a grueling, authentic Black operations experience, stating explicitly that the entire tactical curriculum was designed and certified by the legendary shadow operative known as Valkyrie. He was actively monetizing my ghost. I did not call a lawyer. Lawyers operate in the light. I put on a dark jacket, started my truck, and drove straight into downtown Boise. The corporate headquarters for Thorn Survival Enterprises occupied the entire top floor of a sleek glass and steel high-rise, a testament to unearned wealth and hollow prestige. I ignored the protests of the bewildered receptionist, bypassing the security desk entirely. I pushed open the heavy double doors of his private suite without bothering to knock. Marcus was sitting behind a massive oak desk, casually tossing a golf ball into the air. When he saw me, he did not flinch. Instead, a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "I was wondering how long it would take for you to drop by," Marcus said, gesturing lazily toward a leather chair. "Please, take a seat. Allison." "Take the campaign down today," I stated, my voice dead flat. I remained standing near the door, my hands resting loosely at my sides. "You are playing a game you do not understand. You do not have the right to use my operational history." Marcus laughed aloud, a sharp, grating sound that bounced off the expensive artwork on his walls. "Your history." "What history you see?" "After our little encounter at the barbecue, I made some calls. I hired a very expensive private investigator to run a deep background check on the mighty Valkyrie. Do you want to know what he found?" Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished wood. "According to every database in the United States government, you are a former administrative logistics clerk for the Department of Agriculture who took early medical retirement due to a clumsy fall. You do not exist. Your classified agency does not exist. You have absolutely no legal standing to issue a cease and desist. You cannot sue me for stealing a reputation that, legally speaking, is a total fabrication. If you try to take me to court, a judge will laugh you out of the room." He stood up, adjusting his custom-tailored suit jacket, and walked slowly around the desk until he was standing just a few feet away from me. His smug demeanor hardened into something ugly and venomous. "But let us explore the alternative," he whispered, invading my personal space. "Let us say you try to be a hero. Let us say you go to the press, or you try to spook my investors. If you do that, Allison, I will completely destroy Sarah. Her signature is on the founding documents of 3 of my subsidiary companies. She signed the papers because she is a naive girl who trusts her fiancé. If you interfere with my cash flow, I will intentionally tank those subsidiaries. I will dump nearly $3 million of toxic debt squarely onto her shoulders. She will lose her house, her savings, and she will be fighting federal tax audits for the rest of her miserable life. So, you can either go back to the woods and take pictures of pine cones, or you can watch your beloved cousin burn to ashes. The choice is entirely yours." He was absolutely confident. He believed he had perfectly checkmated a ghost because he only understood the rules of the civilian world. I stared into his eyes, memorizing the exact geometry of his arrogance, and walked out without speaking a single word. By nightfall, I was back in the absolute isolation of my cabin. The time for diplomacy had officially expired. I dragged the heavy steel footlocker out from the darkest corner of my closet and unlocked the biometric seal. Inside lay the tools of a trade I thought I had abandoned forever. I bypassed the standard firearms and pulled out a ruggedized, military-grade tactical laptop, a satellite uplink terminal, and a series of encrypted signal routing drives. The Tactical Oversight Bureau had trained me to pull the trigger. Yes, but they had also trained me to dismantle hostile communications and financial networks from the inside out. Marcus thought his corporate firewalls were secure because he paid a civilian tech firm a few $1,000s a month. He was an amateur. I brewed a pot of black coffee and went to work. It took me less than 45 minutes to crack the administrative portal of Thorn Survival Enterprises. I ghosted through his external servers, bypassing dual-factor authentication protocols by spoofing the IP address of his chief financial officer. Once I was inside the central mainframe, I began pulling every single internal communication, every encrypted email, and every hidden financial ledger. As the data parsed across my screen in endless streams of code, the true scope of his operation began to take shape. It was not just a case of stolen valor or simple corporate greed. The numbers did not make any sense. His survival training company was reporting millions of dollars in revenue for elite courses that had zero actual attendees. He was listing equipment purchases for high-end tactical gear that never shipped to any warehouse. I dug deeper, cross-referencing the incoming wire transfers with global banking databases. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Marcus was not building a survival company. He was running a sophisticated money laundering syndicate. The tens of thousands of dollars supposedly being paid by corporate executives for tactical training were actually massive, structured deposits from a notorious international financial crime cartel. He was using the facade of a rugged military boot camp to wash millions of dollars of dirty money, turning illicit cartel cash into legitimate corporate revenue. But the most sickening discovery was hidden in an encrypted subfolder buried deep beneath layers of dummy directories. The folder was labeled with a single-word contingency. I decrypted the documents and found a meticulously fabricated paper trail. Marcus knew that moving this kind of money would eventually attract the attention of the Federal Bureau of Investigation or the Department of the Treasury. To protect himself, he had created a shadow corporate structure within his own company, listing an anonymous chief security officer as the sole architect of the high-ticket training modules. The encrypted emails clearly outlined his final exit strategy. If the federal agents ever raided his offices, Marcus was fully prepared to hand over forged documents naming me, the elusive Valkyrie, as the criminal mastermind behind the entire laundering operation. He was going to use my call sign as his personal shield to avoid a federal prison sentence. The glow of the laptop screen cast long, harsh shadows across the rough timber walls of my cabin. I sat motionless in the dark, processing the sheer magnitude of the trap Marcus had constructed. My initial impulse was to burn his world down immediately, but tactical discipline forced me to calculate the collateral damage. Calling the authorities right now was entirely out of the question, because of the myriad of shell company documents Sarah had been coerced into signing. A premature federal raid would instantly implicate her in a massive cartel laundering scheme. She would be indicted and thrown into a federal holding cell before she could even comprehend what was happening. Marcus had built a perfect, insulated fortress of lies, using my fragile cousin and my stolen military call sign as the load-bearing walls. A blunt, uncoordinated attack would crush the innocent. I had to dismantle his operation from the inside out, surgically, leaving him nowhere to run. Less than 48 hours later, Marcus escalated his arrogant charade to a highly dangerous new tier. He blasted a synchronized press release across every major corporate networking platform, announcing a massive, globally broadcast live stream event. He was hosting a full-scale, live-fire hostage rescue drill on his sprawling private forest estate, a heavily wooded property situated a few miles north of the resort. The event was explicitly designed to secure a fresh round of funding from an exclusive VIP audience of tech billionaires and venture capitalists. The promotional video was slick, heavily edited, and boasted of unparalleled combat realism. But it was the final graphic flashing across the screen that made the muscles in my jaw clench. Bold, aggressive letters stretched across the footage, announcing to the world that the drill would be overseen by a highly classified guest. He had printed it clear as day. Special guest evaluator Valkyrie. It was a blatant dare. He was openly leveraging the legend he had stolen, absolutely confident that I was too paralyzed by his financial blackmail against Sarah to intervene. He believed he held all the cards. Later that afternoon, my encrypted burner phone vibrated. It was Vance. The retired Navy SEAL had not been idle since our last meeting. Tapping into his extensive network of underground military contacts and private defense contractors, he had run deep background checks on the tactical team Marcus had hired to perform for the broadcast. His voice was heavy with disgust when he delivered the intelligence report. They are not elite Tier 1 operators, Vance warned over the secure line. They are absolute garbage. I pulled their files. We are looking at over a dozen guys who were given dishonorable discharges. They were kicked out of the service for severe substance abuse, gross insubordination, and reckless endangerment. They are undisciplined junkies playing dress-up for a paycheck. And the worst part is, Marcus has authorized them to bring live ammunition into an unsecured civilian woodland area to make the show look authentic. If one of those washouts trips on a root or gets trigger-happy, those billionaire investors sitting in the bleachers are going to catch a stray bullet. The situation was devolving into a volatile powder keg, but the spark that finally ignited my fury came at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. My personal cell phone rang, jarring me out of a light, restless sleep. It was Sarah. She was not just crying, she was practically hyperventilating. Her voice muffled and trembling as if she was hiding in a closet. "I am so scared," she choked out, her words coming in frantic, breathless waves. "Marcus just locked me in the hotel suite. He took my passport, my car keys, and all my credit cards. He told me I was becoming an emotional liability and ordered me to stay put until the live stream is over tomorrow afternoon. He said if I try to leave the room, he will have his security guards drag me back by my hair. I do not know what to do." "Listen to me, Sarah," I said, my voice dropping into a calm, authoritative cadence that I used in combat zones. "Do exactly as he says for now. Do not fight him. Do not try the door. Just stay away from the windows and wait. I am handling this. Do you understand me?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please hurry." The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone to the desk. The calculated, restrained patience of an intelligence analyst evaporated instantly, replaced by the cold, pure, unadulterated instinct of an apex predator. Marcus Thorne had crossed the final, irreversible boundary. He had put his hands on my blood. I walked across the wooden floorboards and knelt beside the heavy metal footlocker. I punched in the biometric sequence and threw open the lid. I did not reach for the high-caliber sniper rifles or the tactical sidearms. I did not need bullets to destroy a man whose entire existence was built on an illusion. Taking his life would be too easy, and it would not clear Sarah's name. Instead, I pulled out the instruments of absolute systemic collapse. I packed 3 high-frequency signal jammers, a heavily modified military processing computer capable of slicing through civilian firewalls in seconds, and thick coils of fiber-optic bypassing cables. Finally, I reached into the bottom compartment and lifted out my old woodland camouflage gear, the specialized fabric designed to make a human being vanish entirely into the forest undergrowth. I methodically loaded the equipment into a heavy waterproof tactical duffel bag, checking every battery and every connection. The passive phase of observation was over. The hunt had officially begun. 4 hours before the broadcast was scheduled to go live to the world. The forest canopy above Blackwood Ridge was still thick with the gray mist of early morning. The air was heavy, smelling of damp earth and rotting pine needles. I moved through the dense undergrowth with a fluid, deliberate grace, my body completely swallowed by the specialized woodland camouflage I wore. Every step I took was a calculated equation, a seamless transfer of weight from the heel to the outer edge of the foot, rolling silently toward the toe to avoid snapping a single dry twig. This was my sanctuary. I was a ghost returning to her natural habitat. Vance had driven us to a service road roughly 2 miles east of the designated event perimeter. We did not speak when we parted ways. A single, sharp nod was the only communication required between 2 veterans who fully understood the gravity of the mission. His objective lay back in the concrete geometry of the town, while mine required vanishing into the wild. The perimeter security Marcus had paid top dollar for was a complete joke. As I slipped past the first line of defense, I observed 2 of his hired mercenaries leaning against a rusted bulldozer. They were smoking cheap cigarettes and loudly complaining about the cold. They wore expensive, spotless plate carriers, but their posture was sloppy, and their rifles were slung carelessly across their backs. They were looking outward, expecting a conventional approach. Completely oblivious to the shadow drifting through the ferns barely 20 feet behind them, I bypassed their motion sensors by simply crawling under the infrared tripwires, my heart rate holding steady at an icy 55 beats per minute. While I was dragging my chest through the mud, Marcus Thorne was busy preparing for his coronation. Through a gap in the trees, I caught a glimpse of the main staging area. They had erected a massive command tent, equipped with industrial lighting and multiple camera rigs. I could see him inside the brightly lit enclosure, standing before a full-length mirror. He was meticulously combing his beard, ensuring every hair was perfectly aligned. A makeup artist was dabbing powder onto his forehead to eliminate any shine for the high-definition cameras. He sprayed a heavy cloud of expensive cologne onto his neck, checking his reflection with a sickeningly arrogant grin. He was preparing to play war, utterly blind to the fact that real combat was already inside his wire. I ignored his vanity and focused on the technological nervous system of his operation. I crept toward the communications relay truck, parked at the edge of the clearing. The technician on duty had wandered off to get a cup of coffee, leaving the access panel completely unguarded. I slipped a flathead screwdriver under the metal latch, popping it open with a soft metallic click. Inside, tangles of fiber optic cables pulsed with blue and green indicator lights. I pulled the heavy, ruggedized military computer from my duffel bag and balanced it on my knee. First, I targeted the internal radio frequencies used by the mercenary team. With a few rapid keystrokes, I flooded their tactical channels with a subtle, looping, subaudible frequency. It would not disable their headsets completely, but it would create a constant, maddening static that would render them unable to coordinate effectively when the chaos started. Next came the primary objective. I located the main broadcast server array, the digital pipeline that would stream Marcus's lies to thousands of corporate screens across the globe. I spliced a custom intercept cable directly into his primary upload port. My fingers moved rapidly, typing lines of executable code. Establishing a secure backdoor command prompt, I uploaded the massive encrypted file containing every single ledger, every illicit wire transfer, and the comprehensive paper trail of his cartel money laundering operation. I did not trigger the release immediately. I set the payload on a remote digital trigger, burying the malicious script deep within the broadcast software. It was a perfect digital time bomb, wired to hijack the main video feed the moment I sent the execution signal. I carefully closed the panel, wiping down the metal surface to remove any trace of my presence, and melted back into the dense foliage just as the technician returned with a steaming paper cup. My encrypted earpiece buzzed twice, emitting a soft, localized tone. It was the signal from Vance. He had successfully breached the hotel. The text string that flashed across my wrist monitor confirmed that he had overpowered the single security guard stationed in the hallway, unlocked the suite, and safely extracted Sarah. She was currently sitting in the passenger seat of his armored truck, speeding down the mountain highway toward a secure safe house. More importantly, Vance confirmed that he had just forwarded the complete, unredacted financial dossier to his most trusted contacts within the federal task force. The authorities were already mobilizing. The trap was perfectly set. With my cousin secure and the digital snare armed, I needed the ultimate vantage point. I navigated away from the noisy staging area, scaling a steep, jagged cliff face that overlooked the entire valley. The climb was punishing. The damaged nerves in my left shoulder burned like hot iron, sending agonizing flares of pain down my arm, but I forced the weakness down. I pulled myself over the rocky lip of the ledge, roughly 100 feet above the camp. I wedged myself into a narrow crevice between two massive granite boulders, pulling a camouflage net over my head and shoulders. Within seconds, I became indistinguishable from the gray stone and the scrub brush. I pulled the high-powered optical binoculars from my chest rig and adjusted the focal ring, peering down into the valley. The grandstand was now completely full. Dozens of wealthy investors sat in folding chairs, drinking bottled water, their eyes fixed on the main stage. The camera operators hoisted their heavy equipment onto their shoulders, the red recording lights blinking to life. I watched through the magnified lenses As Marcus Thorne finally stepped out from the command tent, the crowd erupted into polite applause. He marched toward the center of the stage, puffing out his chest, completely absorbed in the delusion of his own greatness. He grabbed the microphone, his voice booming across the valley through the massive speaker system, welcoming the billionaires to the ultimate combat simulation. He raised his fist, declaring himself a legendary operator, a master of survival, and a leader of men. High above him, hidden in the unforgiving stone, I did not feel a trace of anger. I just smiled. It was a cold, absolute smile. The stage was set, the audience was captive, and the false king was standing directly on the trapdoor. I rested my thumb against the execution button on my tactical remote, waiting for the perfect moment to pull the lever. "The simulation is about to commence," Marcus announced. His voice artificially deepened for the microphone, echoing off the valley walls. He paced the massive stage, projecting the image of a seasoned military commander to the sea of wealthy investors. "The battlefield is a dark, unforgiving place. It takes a rare breed of warrior to survive it. That is why today, we are honored to have the legendary operative known as Valkyrie evaluating our combat readiness from the shadows." He pointed dramatically toward the tree line, having absolutely no idea I was actually up there looking down at him, down in the brush. His team of hired, washed-up mercenaries began their tactical advance, but these men were not professionals. They were undisciplined and careless. Less than 2 minutes into the drill, a deafening explosion ripped through the air. One of the mercenaries had mishandled a live incendiary device. A blinding flash of orange erupted near the edge of the forest, instantly igniting the dry pine needles and dead wood. Thick, black smoke billowed into the sky. The fire rapidly caught the lower branches of the evergreens, spreading with terrifying speed. The crowd of billionaires and venture capitalists gasped, murmuring in confusion, unsure if this was part of the show. It was not. Marcus froze, the arrogant swagger completely drained from his body, when a secondary blast echoed from the burning woods, causing a shockwave that rattled the grandstand. His true nature was finally exposed. He did not issue commands. He did not guide his important guests to safety. Instead, he let out a high-pitched, terrified scream. He dropped the microphone and bolted. He shoved his way through the crowd, physically knocking over a 60-year-old hedge fund manager to clear his own path toward his customized armored vehicle. Panic instantly infected the crowd. People began to run, screaming as the flames climbed higher into the canopy. From my perch on the cliff, I pressed my thumb firmly against the trigger button on my tactical remote. The digital bomb detonated. Down in the valley, the massive screens flanking the stage abruptly glitched in a burst of static. Marcus's slick corporate logo vanished. In its place, giant, undeniable spreadsheets illuminated the screens, displaying tens of millions of dollars in illicit wire transfers. The livestream feed, broadcasting to thousands of viewers globally, locked onto the documents. Next came the internal emails, blown up to massive proportions, showing Marcus viciously mocking the very veterans he claimed to support. Then, the audio kicked in, an incredibly crisp, undeniable recording of Marcus's own voice blasted through the valley's surround sound speaker system. "She signed the papers because she is a naive girl," his recorded voice sneered. The exact words he had spoken to me in his office. "If you interfere with my cash flow, I will intentionally tank those subsidiaries. I will dump nearly $3 million of toxic debt squarely onto her shoulders." The fleeing investors stopped in their tracks, staring at the screens in absolute horror. The man they were about to give their money to was not a hero. He was a monster. I engaged my microphone override. My voice, calm, steady, and cold as ice, cut through the panic, projecting over the entire valley. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. This is Valkyrie." The entire valley fell silent, save for the crackling of the distant fire. "The man who just pushed you to the ground is a fraud," I continued, my tone commanding absolute authority. The documents you see on your screens are proof of a massive cartel money laundering syndicate. The fire is currently contained to the northern perimeter. Please proceed in an orderly fashion to the paved service road at the south end of the camp. Do not run. You are perfectly safe. As the crowd began to evacuate smoothly under my direction, the rhythmic, heavy thumping of helicopter rotors shook the sky. 3 massive federal choppers painted in dark colors crested the mountain ridge, accompanied by state police cruisers tearing down the dirt roads, sirens wailing. Vance had timed his call perfectly. From my sniper's vantage point, I watched through the optics as federal agents swarmed the camp. They dragged Marcus out of his expensive armored truck before he could even start the engine. The man who had mocked me at the barbecue was now face down in the mud, sobbing uncontrollably. The high-definition live-stream camera zoomed in on his face as the agents locked heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. He was crying, begging the officers for mercy, his expensive tactical gear ruined and stained with dirt. The world watched his pathetic downfall live. I powered down my equipment, packed my bag, and melted back into the forest, leaving the chaos to the authorities. 2 weeks later, the mountain air felt entirely different. I sat on a sun-drenched balcony overlooking the lake, sipping a warm cup of coffee. Sarah sat across from me, looking lighter, happier, and completely free from the massive shadow of debt and fear Marcus had tried to cast over her. I did not need a medal. I did not need public recognition. Marcus Thorne had looked at me, a quiet woman with a camera, and asked if I could even shoot. I had given him his answer. I never fired a single bullet, but I had taken the most devastating, precise shot of my life, completely annihilating his empire of lies and leaving nothing but ashes in the wind. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Maya Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.